Hey everyone, it is Silly Man here. Today I'll be showing you how to make a collapsing block similar to the one in difficulty chart obbies. So instead of fading away, these ones will just collapse and then disappear. So let's get started. I'm going to insert a part into the workspace and then resize it. So I'll do 6 by 1 by 6. Then I'm just going to pull it up, make sure it's anchored. I'll call this collapsing block. And typically these blocks will have an image on it, so to do that, we can use either a decal or a surface GUI. I'm going to use a surface GUI because it allows for more customization. So go to the collapsing block, insert object, and then I'm going to insert a surface GUI. And then inside of that, insert object, and I'm going to insert an image label. So then go to the surface GUI, and we need to make sure that the image shows up on top. So I'm going to change the face property of the surface GUI to top. That way the image is on the top. Then I'm just going to resize the image. So for the size, I'm going to do 0.8, 0.80, and then center the image. So set the anchor point to 0.5, comma 0.5, and then I'll set the position to 0.50, 0.50. That will center the image. For the image, I'm going to use one that I created. So I'm going to get the asset ID of this. So we just click on the number here in the link and then copy it. You can use your own image or use this one. I will put the link, I will put the asset ID of it in the description. And then go back into Studio and then paste it for the image. And then I'm going to change the background transparency to 1. That way we can get rid of the white part. And then I'm going to go down to image transparency. I'll set this to maybe 0.5. I think that looks good. Okay, and then lastly, I'm going to make a folder and put it into workspace. And I'm going to call this collapsing blocks. And then put the collapsing block inside of the folder. Okay, so now it's time to do some scripting. So I will actually be using a local script for this because we want the collapsing blocks to be client-sided. That way when a player touches it, it will only collapse for them. And this is actually how it is in most difficulty chart obbies. It's only going to collapse for the player that actually touches it. So if another player touches it, it will not collapse for you. So open up starter player, and then you're going to see a folder called starter player scripts. Inside of that, you want to insert a local script. So we're going to need the player service and tween service. This will allow us to do the shrinking animation. And then I'm going to make a variable for the player object, which is players.localPlayer. And then a variable for the folder we created here. So that's going to be local collapsing blocks equals workspace dot collapsing blocks. And then under that, we're going to need to make an event for when the player touches the block here. And we also want this to apply for any other blocks that get added to this folder. So to do that, I'm going to use a for loop. We're going to say for I v in pairs collapsing blocks get children. This will get every block that is inside of this folder. So if we have multiple blocks, I'm actually just going to duplicate it. It will apply for both of these blocks. Okay, so it looks like I actually duplicated the folder. Let's just move this block inside of this folder and delete this. Now I'm going to make a couple of variables here. So one is going to be the initial size of these blocks. So local initial size equals v.size. So v is going to be each one of these blocks. So they actually could be of a different size. So I'll make this one a little bit bigger. So this variable here, for the smaller block, it will be 616. And for the bigger block, it will be 818. And then I'm going to make one more variable called dbounce. This will basically make it so that when the player touches it and it starts to disappear, in the middle of that, it doesn't start disappearing again because that's going to cause glitches. So I'm going to create a touched event. So v.touched connect function. And this is the event which will fire multiple times when a player touches it. So that's why we use the dbounce variable to prevent it from firing several times. We only want this to run one time. So now we need to check to make sure what actually touched one of these blocks was the player. So to do that, we're going to say if hit.parent equals player.character. Then, so next I'm going to make sure that the player is actually alive, that they didn't die from another obstacle maybe, since these blocks will typically be used in obbies. So I'm going to say local humanoid equals player dot character find first child humanoid. So we'll get the humanoid of the player. And then to check if the player's health is greater than 0, so that means that they're alive, we do if humanoid and humanoid dot health is greater than 0. And then I'm also going to check the debounce variable here, because after this we're going to run the code that will make the block shrink. So and debounce equals false. Then, so after this we're going to make the block shrink. So I'm going to first set the debounce to true. This will indicate that the block is starting to shrink. So typically it takes a second or two for the block to actually start shrinking. So I'm going to wait 1 second. So now we're going to write code that will make the block shrink. So I'm going to do local shrink tween. And now we have to use tween service to make the block shrink. So tween service create. And then this is going to take in a few parameters. So the first one is going to be the block itself, since that's what we want to shrink. That's what we want to animate. So we do v for that, because that is because this code is inside of a for loop. So v is going to be the block. And then the second parameter is going to be a tween info variable. And the first parameter is going to be how fast we want the animation to be. So I'm going to do 1 second. So we'll take 1 second for the block to fully shrink. And then it's going to ask for an easing style. So I'll do enum.easing style dot. And then here we can choose from a few different options. I'm going to choose linear. That way the block will shrink at a constant rate. And then the last variable is going to be the properties we want to change. And make sure for the last variable you do it for the create function. So make sure that it's not like this, that you put it outside of the tween info variable. So this is its own variable, and then this is the variable after that. So here we need to write the properties that we want the block to change to once the block has fully shrunk. So when the block is fully shrunk, we want it to be invisible. So to do this, we're going to set the size property to 0. But you can't literally set the size of a block to 0. So we're instead going to just set it to 0.1 for each axis. Okay, so then we're going to say shrink tween play. And this will play the animation. And then I'm going to wait for the animation to complete. So shrink tween dot completed wait. Now keep in mind that the block is not completely invisible. It's still visible a little bit because we set the size to 0.1. Luckily there is a way to actually make the block invisible. So we're going to say shrink tween, or not shrink tween, but we need to actually apply this to the block. So v.transparency equals 1. This will make the block invisible. And then we also are going to turn off collisions. So v.canCollide equals false. And then we also need to make the image here not visible. So just because you set the transparency of a part to 1, which makes it invisible, that will not make the image invisible. So to do that, I'm going to make a variable. We'll actually do it here for the image inside of the block. Local surface GUI equals, so here it's going to be v, because that is the part. It's inside of the for loop. v.surface GUI. We'll do wait for child, just to make sure that it's actually loaded. And then here I'm going to just set the surface GUI dot enable to false. That will hide the image. And then I'm going to wait a few seconds. So task.wait. I'll wait maybe 3 seconds, and then we'll make the block visible again. And to make the block visible, first I'm going to set the size of the block back to the initial size here. And then make it visible again. So v.transparency equals 0. And then turn back collisions. So v.canCollide equals true. And also make the image visible again. Surface UI dot enabled equals true. And then lastly, we're going to set the debounce back to false. Okay, so I'm going to call this script collapsing blocks. And then let's hit play to test. Okay, so I'm going to step on the block. All right, looks like something's not working. All right, so I found the issue. We actually need to click on workspace and then make sure that this option called streaming enabled is disabled. So by default, it might be checked. So make sure to uncheck that. And then if we hit play and step on the block, you're going to see that it shrinks and that I fall down. So that shrinking animation was a little bit slow though. So let's make that a little bit faster. So I'm going to change the variable here because this is the shrink tween, the amount of time that it takes to collapse. So I'll change that to maybe 0.5. Let's hit play and step on it. There we go. You can do that for this one as well. It will also shrink and I fall down. And that is going to be it for today's video. So if you found this video helpful, please leave a like and I will see you all in the next video.